Graham, thanks for joining me today, man.
Thanks, Jared. I'm pumped to be here.
So for those of you that don't know, um, but are familiar with Excelsior, Graham is our mortgage broker. And so if you've done a deal, you invested in a deal over the last couple of years, probably what, 2.5, 3 years maybe,
Yeah.
with Excelsior, Graham has been highly involved on the debt side of things. And so I've had the pleasure of building a great working relationship with Graham over the last couple of years, and then know him outside of the work field as well. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes today. Graham,
Yeah,
as is
definitely.
as is typical with a lot of these, I like to just kind of start with a little bit of background, just so people can get a good feel of who you are, where you are, how you got there. So let's just start with a little bit of your career journey, and we'll go from there.
Sure. How early do you want me to start? Like I grew up, you know, in like there.
Let's start. Let's start after college.
Okay, great. So went to undergrad at Samford University. Go Bulldogs! Had a heartbreaker of a loss the other night against Kansas. We won't get into that on here, but went there, graduated with a degree in finance from the business school. Had no clue what I really wanted to do up until about my senior year. I kind of randomly did an internship for a commercial real estate developer here in Nashville called Boyle Investment Company. Um, and I don't really know kind of what happened there, but I remember about halfway through that summer realizing a couple things. One, first being, hey, I really like this. This is really interesting to me. And two was, hey, I maybe think like this could be a career that I would eventually become halfway decent at. And those two things, kind of those aha moments, led me down a path of um, just being more curious in that field. I actually, uh, right after that internship, I flew out to Brisbane, Australia, and lived in Australia for a year and worked for a nonprofit. It was basically like a Christian ministry in Brisbane on a university campus. And about halfway through that, I realized I thought I kind of wanted to do that, and realized I actually don't want to do this. I really am sitting here kind of thinking about what I worked on in my real estate internship and how interesting it was and how I got excited about it. And so, yeah, flew back after my year-long visa was up and got a job in real estate, writing market reports. And then one thing led to another, and started working for my current company. And then was lucky enough to call Excelsior Capital a client a few years back. So that's the short and sweet of it.
So I think you and I have discussed offline kind of the direction that we want to go with this, and I think this next question leads into that a little bit. So you're in college, you have no idea what you want to do with your life, right? What is the
Mm-hmm.
connection between this whole idea of like finding your passion, right? So our generation specifically, which will kind of loop in Gen Z and millennials here. I'm probably on the middle to younger end of millennials. You're more on the younger end, I would say. But we have this idea of like,
I'm like a
yeah,
tweener. I'm like
you're right on
kind
the
of a
edge, right?
millennial, kind of a Gen
We'll
Z.
go.
We'll go with millennial.
We'll
Yeah,
go
yeah,
with
yeah,
millennial for
yeah,
purposes of this podcast. It makes you sound more
yeah.
established anyway. That's kind of weird.
I feel like a baby boomer, so it doesn't really matter. But we'll
That's
call it
what
millennial
I'm an
for
old
this podcast.
soul. So I'm with you there.
Yeah,
For for those of you that are not aware, I'm in bed by 9. So I am a baby boomer at this point. Um,
yeah,
but I
definitely.
think our generation is so accustomed to these motivational highlight reels, right? So I had Matt Poppert on. We recorded it back in February. It was actually released this week, um, which today, as of recording, is March 25th. You won't be released for a couple of weeks, but and he talked about this whole idea of like discipline versus motivation, and motivation only gets you so far. And I think that's relative here in this whole idea of like finding your passion that our age group is so focused on. And what I come to, and what you and I had kind of talked about offline, was these different highlight reels, call it commencement speeches, that you see. The one that you brought up was the Steve Jobs videos, like finding your passion. The one that comes to
Mm-hmm.
me, to mind for me, is like this whole Jim Carrey speech where he says, you can fail at what you don't like, so you might as
That's a
well
great one.
pursue what you do. Where were you in terms of, finding what you want to do from a career base? Because like 18 to 22 years old, man, nobody knows what they want to do, right? At least long term. Like, you change so much over the course of your life. I think people underestimate that. How do you find, something that you're going to be good at, or something that you're passionate about, that's going to last all the way through your 60s?
Yeah. Well, I don't know the exact answer to that, but I do know what worked for me. And obviously I'm a little biased, right? Like, it worked for me, so I think everyone should do this. But I really think the principles of what I went through can help a lot of people. And which is why I wanted to talk about this. So I think like going to Samford. Samford is, for those that don't know, it's a fantastic school, but it is religiously affiliated. It's technically Southern Baptist, but we'll just call it like a private Christian university. And when you get in that environment with young people, a lot of young people in there really have very great big ideas for the impact that they're going to make on the world, which is fantastic. And I had the same, still hopefully have a bit of that, but definitely had a lot more of that. Um, the author Michael Lewis jokingly calls it, when you're in your early 20s, you still have hope. I think that's a little too crude, but basically, everyone has this grand big idea for what they're going to do to impact the world, whether it's, for something as honorable as, human trafficking, or poverty, and you name the impoverished place. But I found myself having a bit of that, going like, well, I'm around all these very charismatic, um, older Christian men that really meant a lot to me and still do. And kind of feeling like, well, if I'm really going to make an impact, especially when I'm younger, like, I should just be doing ministry when I'm in my youth, especially, not married, no kids. That's when the time is to do that. And I still agree with that to some extent, but it was almost like there was this like subconscious feeling within me of, if you're really a strong Christian, like, this is what you'll go do. You'll go and work in ministry full time. And now later looking back, I know that way of thinking is actually, does more harm than good. And it did for me. And so that's just what I had my sights set on. So like, doing the internship in Australia was this great, like, I'll try this out for a year, and I'm really glad, I'm thankful for it. And I had a great time, and I learned a lot. But I just remember like this feeling of here, and this is where I'm going with this feeling of, I am actually not really that good at this. Like, this is a lot harder for me than I thought it would be. And I can get into the nuances of that, but just high level, I wasn't very good at it. Like, I was not, I just, there was so many things about it that you just had to always be ready for your day to change. Like, in ministry, a student may cancel on you for lunch, or, this appointment moves to here. And you just always have to be in this mindset of, and I just needed a lot more structure throughout my day, like just how I'm wired. And a part of me felt bad about that. Like, I had this idea in my head of like, oh, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and why can't this work out? And then I just had this really great, someone told me to read this book, and it's called Just Do Something. It's by an author named Kevin DeYoung. It's got a Christian bent to it, but I think it's got great advice for anyone that's feeling this way. Kevin DeYoung's whole point, and he's writing it to young people, is there's not one thing that you're supposed to be doing that, God has ordained for you to be doing. It's just, you're wired a certain way. And when you're doing something that brings out the way you're wired in a good way, right? That you feel like, oh, this is good. Like, I feel good when I'm doing this. I'm making an impact. I'm also, it's just how I'm wired. and reading that book just gave me a lot of freedom. And so halfway through that time in Australia, I just was like, I'm going to go give this real estate thing a try. Like, I really liked it. I was pretty good at it. I think I can get a lot better at it. And that's my whole point of this conversation we're trying to have today is like, I think that I was really thinking, this is my purpose, right? To go and be in ministry. And my purpose is actually not a profession. My purpose is go find something that you're good at and how you're wired and how I would argue God has made you and made me, and go and get better at it and go and keep making impact and keep getting better and better and better and cultivating your work through that avenue. So I think I answered your original question through that rambling, but that's kind of where that's how this all started with me, and that's why I get kind of fired up talking.
I love that
with
the conversation is going this direction. Sidebar: I in college tried to study abroad at the University of Sunshine Coast in Australia, and my parents who were parents were assisting me with college. I didn't pay for all of it, but they were assisting me with college, and they basically said funding stops if I go there just because of the name. They had no idea anything about it, but that was it for them.
And it's so Sunshine Coast. One of my best friends in Brisbane was from the Sunshine Coast. And in Brisbane, there's a community north of it called the Sunshine Coast, and then there's a community south of it called the Gold Coast. And so and I'm like, these places can't be like. And I went to both of them, and they're both. It is what it sounds like. Like, it's amazing. So I'm honestly a little bummed for you that you didn't get to go.
Myself. But back to the topic at hand. I love that this is going this direction because I had Nate Salas on last week, so he should be released prior to your episode by a week, and we talked about, he runs a large construction company up in the Madison, Wisconsin area, but he's been highly involved in his community over the last 10 years. And the whole premise of that conversation was, like you said, in your 20s, you have this big idea for hope, and it's, I'm going to go out and change the world. But in all reality, that type of thinking leads to not taking action within your specific community. So over the last 10 years, he's used his experience in banking and then now running construction to impact his town, his community, taking small steps here. And I think relatedly is when we get into a profession or whatever, we may not feel fulfilled when we start a business. We may not feel fulfilled from like our impact on the world. I mean, I started in accounting, for goodness sakes. Like, you cannot think of a more boring, less impactful career on the surface. But what it did was it allowed me to then go out and be the finance director for Susan G. Komen here in Nashville and provide, my assistance and my expertise in ways that led to that fulfillment. And I think that's kind of related here, maybe.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I think that's spot on to what we're getting at.
Yeah. So,
I mean, and expanding on that, like, here's what I would argue, right, about you, and I've worked with you enough to know this. You are uniquely wired and built to be really, really good at a couple things, right? Which is getting into the details, looking at numbers and spreadsheets and P&Ls and saying, like, this is why this isn't working. We need to change this. We need to change that. A lot of your colleagues, and one of the, you guys are a great client of mine, but they could not do that to save their life. Like, your colleagues would, Excelsior Capital would go under tomorrow, if that's a bit over exaggeration, but you get what I'm saying. Like, you're uniquely wired to do those things, right? And so accounting is a great example of, like, so many people are not wired to be accountants, but they are told, like, that's a safe career field, and you can make a lot of money, and all these things. So they go and study accounting, and a part of me is like, that's fine, but, like, why are you doing that if you absolutely hate it? You might not have loved with a passion. You were on the tax side of things, right? Yeah, public tax or tax, the tax side of the business. But, like, you probably saw, ooh, there are aspects of this that I really like. I'm really good at these couple things. I'm wired to enjoy this. Like, let me find something that complements a lot of that. And I'll admit, a large part of your early 20s is just doing crap that sucks and finding little parts of that you enjoy and that you're good at. And then so that when you get some skills in your mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, you can then pivot to a job that the majority of your day is doing stuff that you actually kind of like, which is the stage of you and I. We're in that stage of
Depends
our
on the
careers
day.
now, right? But you still, yeah, yeah. But you still, you have that skill set of that you can still say, like, I can give back to Susan G. Komen in a way that a lot of other people can't. Like, if myself included, like if Susan G. Komen, someone called me and said, "Do you want to be on the Treasury Committee?" I'd be like, I mean, I can, but you really don't want me to be, like that's how that conversation would go. So that's my point and I think that's a really great illustration of
Yeah, I mean,
my
for
point.
me in the accounting world, and I definitely don't want to make this episode about me, but just in terms of like people being able to use my experience as an example, I was torn on the accounting side of things. There was this whole audit track where I could go out and I could be sociable and use my extroverted personality, but there was no structure whatsoever. Like
Mm-hmm.
what you were talking about that you experienced in Australia, there is zero structure in Australia or in audit. You could be somewhere for 2 weeks and then turn around and be somewhere else for 2 weeks. I love to wake up in the same spot, get my workout in at the same time, eat dinner at the same time, go to bed at the same time. There was none of that. And then there was this tax side of things where I probably had a little bit more of a natural inclination on that side. But man, I just sat at a desk all day and did the same thing. You had different
Yeah.
scenarios, right? Like one client A brings you something and client B brings you something, and they're completely different. But at the end of the day, you're doing the same exact thing pretty much. And so it just didn't fulfill me from that perspective. But what it did do is it gave me the background to then somehow venture into this real estate space where I didn't know if I was going to like it at the beginning, but over time, I've been here for 5 years now. It's my passion for it as I've gained experience has just continued to grow. So maybe talk about that whole idea of like, you can't become an expert. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell that said it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, which from a
Yep.
career perspective, that's essentially 5 years, somewhere in the 4 to 6 year, mostly 4 to 5 year range to become an expert. And more likely than not, you're not going to have passion about it until you become an expert, right? Like, I think back to being a child, playing soccer was not fun for me. I was terrible at it. But as I involved in
Sure.
other sports, those sports became incredibly fun because my experience grew. So maybe talk about this whole idea in your career of like really enjoying something as you progressed, even though that may not be the track that you thought you were going to go down.
Yeah. And just I will do that, but do me a favor, elaborate a little bit more for me on when you transitioned from tax into real estate. What were some of the things that you noticed about yourself as you were growing, maybe first 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, that you started saying, like, I don't know if I'm passionate about this, but like I'm starting to like it, or maybe I don't even like it, but I'm starting to get good at it. And then the skills and the feeling of I'm good at this almost allowed you or made you like it. Do you have any of those moments that you can think back on that you were like, oh,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And
No,
I don't mean to
We'll
put you on
flip
the
the
spot,
script. I
but
like this. I think,
well, that this answer will then help me elaborate on what you just. But I
yeah,
think
I
it's
mean, and
important.
I'll try to provide the cliff notes as much as possible. So coming out of tax, I just knew that wasn't what I wanted to do anymore, especially the long grind of tax season, right? I was working 100-hour plus weeks for 13 weeks straight. And I've talked about that on the show a little bit before, but it just
Jeez.
really,
Yeah.
grinded me down. And so I was just looking for something different. And essentially, Brian Adams, founder of Excelsior, plucked me out because it was an accounting and finance role. But And maybe it was because it was a small business, but what I found very quickly was that in public accounting, the tax world specifically, but I'm sure it's the same in audit, it is a very structured path to success. You're essentially going to spend 2 years at each role. I was a little bit ahead of that because of
Mm-hmm.
hard work and probably just as much luck. But you're essentially going to spend 2 years at each level and you're going to move up in line with your peers. And what I realized when I moved over to Excelsior is that there was the ability to insert myself into other areas of the business that would provide growth and allow me to fulfill myself in other ways that I didn't see possible in tax. So, could you make the case that that could have been done regardless of the industry? Absolutely. But in my case, it just so happened that it was in real estate, which I've come to thoroughly enjoy. And, there's most people think of our business as being just about real estate, but it's very multifaceted in more ways than people could possibly imagine. And I've had the ability to insert myself into those areas and hopefully excel.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful context. So, and I embarrassingly forgot your original question was we got here through you asking me what basically the
So I had to think back too because I had forgotten as well. Essentially, what I was asking,
well, and let me,
well, essentially what I was
yeah,
asking is, how does passion grow as you gain experience, right? So like you
yeah,
may be good at
that was
something
it.
without having
So
passion, but the more you do it and the more you focus on ways that you can cultivate that passion within the things that you're good at, I think the more that it grows.
I think, and I want to do that, but I want to just very briefly touch on. I think it's important to talk about. So I'm gonna write that down. But I think it's important to talk about why is it people our age are so obsessed with I got to do what I'm passionate about. I got to find my purpose. I think I have a little rant about this. I think it's not our fault. It's like classic millennial me to like blame someone else. Like it's not my
That's how
fault.
we know
You're the one
you're a
that handed me the
millennial.
participation trophy. But yeah, really. But like we watched our parents go through the great financial crisis, and for almost all of our parents, that was really hard, right? Like I think your parents
Mm-hmm.
own car dealerships. Like my dad worked for a big company, and it was brutal. He dealt with bad bosses. He dealt with long hours. He was not the captain of his own ship, right? Essentially, he worked really hard and made a great living, and I'm forever thankful for him for doing that. But like, yeah, just watching them go through that, I think we all were like, we were all watching our parents be like, this kind of sucks. Like they're all, and like very few people, I even remember like very few of my friends' parents. I grew up in Brentwood, Tennessee. I'm very thankful to grow up where I grew up, but it's a fairly affluent community. And I would watch my friends' parents also like make a great living, but just like come home or not be around for the soccer game or not be around for whatever. And just like, this kind of sucks. And we all collectively as a generation watched that. And we said, I think like subconsciously, we all said, I don't want to do that. Like there's got to be some other way. Unfortunately, that, for all ways in which people overcorrect too, there's some bad that comes out of that. And I think that the bad that came out of that was our generation being overly obsessed with it, right? And almost like making us depressed. And it's a very serious word to throw around, but depressed that like we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're not doing what I'm not passionate about. I don't get and it's like I love my job, but there are days like work is work and work is supposed to be hard. And there are days when I wake up and I'm like, I don't really want to do this, or I don't want to go do like I'd rather it's a beautiful day today. Like I'd rather sit on a patio and have a beer and, go play golf. But like that's we overly course corrected but I'm curious if you have any other. I just made my kind of point, my rant. I don't have any science to back it up, but that's just how I feel. We watched our parents go through that. I'm curious if you have any other thoughts as to why people our age, are still so obsessed with passion, purpose. Got to be doing that
Yeah,
one
no, I
right
think that's
thing.
a good part of
Um,
it. Absolutely. I think, for every trend there is a counter trend. And so what I would be curious to know, and maybe you have a take on this as well, is what led our parents down into that like mental state, right? Um because I think
mm,
there's certainly, you look at the trends in terms of like parenthood, right? And the things that our generation is focused on are doing the things that our parents weren't focused on. And I'm sure that what they were focused on, and
hmm
call it the 80s and 90s, were correcting the things that they felt their parents didn't do a good job of. So there's this trend that continues of you're always trying to correct the
totally.
things that your parents. There's twofold to that question: is what caused our parents
Yeah,
to feel that way?
that's how therapists make a living today.
I didn't realize this was going to be a
Just talk
therapy
about your
session.
parents, and
Um,
no, it's. I mean, it's kind of
yeah, I mean,
it's
I
good.
guess the twofold question would be, and maybe I'll pose it back to you, is, what caused our parents to feel that way or to tread down that path? And then on the opposite side of
Yeah,
that, what are we, what is it? What is the example that we're setting for our kids?
yeah. Now that could be a whole nother podcast right there. That's a great question. Um, I don't really know. I mean, I think you'd have to get your dad on here and interview him, or something like that, or like a adult psychologist, or someone who's like studied patterns of work and generational changes in work. That would actually be really fascinating. But I think anecdotally, like watching my parents, my grandparents, their parents are children of the Great Depression. And, it was just like, hey, I mean, get a job and you work for the same company for 20, 30, 40 years. Cause like, that's the way you keep food on the table. And that's about it. I mean, it's like the stories I've heard about what my grandparents went through in the Depression was like pretty brutal. And so if I grew up under parents like that were that frugal and that disciplined and that committed to their work and to their employer, I would be the same. I don't blame my parents at all. I don't blame their generation at all. I would be the same way. I think what they all learned and what we saw, you and I saw this firsthand, being loyal to your company, your employer, even to your boss. When the GFC hit, all that was BS. Like none of that mattered. That was all bull, because it was like your boss could do nothing. It was like sales are down, the market sucks, the economy's in the tank, like, we gotta let you go, or we're cutting your salary, you're not getting your bonus, or pensions are gone, just so we all saw that, I think, and we were like, these people aren't going to be like. That's why I think there's a huge generational gap right now between like people that are hiring, senior executives hiring younger people. It's like there's no loyalty anymore. It's like, well, you shouldn't expect them to be loyal, because the next bad quarter, like, you might fire them. You might have to fire them, and that's okay. Um, that's what I think, but I don't have any data to,
Yeah, I
it's
think
just what
the
I, that's,
the promise the
to back that
promise
up. But
has
you might have a good
changed,
perspective
right?
on that
Like,
too.
from our
Yeah.
grandparents, there was this whole idea of, you work here, and you brought this up, you work here for 30 years, and at the end of that 30 years you get a nice pension and a watch. And then for our
Yep.
parents,
Yeah.
there was
Watch.
this
Yeah.
whole idea of um, security, maybe, and safety within their corporate role. And
Yeah.
then the great financial crisis kind of wore that down. And now you're in an environment where
Mm-hmm.
younger folks have seen that and watched two generations, three generations really, of that promise change over time. And so there certainly is not the same loyalty that there was before. I mean, all of my
Yeah.
friends, and probably yours as well, have had, and we're starting to go down a little bit of a rant here, but that's okay. Have had 2, 3, 4, maybe sometimes 5 different jobs in a decade or so.
Right. Right. And maybe that's a symptom of the overcorrection that we talked about here. But I think that's a great segue into your original question that I forgot earlier, which is like, how do you become passionate through your work? Like how does one start doing something that they're not sure about or they might not even like, and then how do they eventually find some passion or joy or just have go throughout your week or your month or your year and just kind of go, you know what, I do really like my job, or I like what I get to do, or I like how does that happen? I think that there's a couple ways to look at it, and they're all very different, and it's different for the person. But we talked about this earlier. Early 20s are you're just figuring it out, and you're not really going to be that good at anything, and that's okay. But when you do find things that you're good at, I always encourage, I think it's worthwhile to encourage people, like, take a step back. Why is it that you like this and you're good at it? And you can really take some time and figure out your own personal wiring, right? So, for example, I love what I get to do now because it's a perfect mix of analytical and people, right? And so I always tell people, like, real estate's far more of an art than a science. I pull up a spreadsheet and analyze one of Excelsior Capital's latest deals. But there's a lot of art that goes into it too. Like, this property is located in this part of town. Like, how do we feel about this part of town? The way this building's designed. Like, is it attractive for a tenant in this market? Is it not? And it's just there's way more art to it. And you got to know people that can help you answer this question. It's a people business, right? You got to call the local leasing broker and be like, hey, why does this tenant want to lease here and not here? And so I found that, I saw that part of the business, and I was like, that's awesome. Like, and a little peek behind the curtain here, I wasn't the best student in undergrad, really in school ever. And so, like, having a clear black and white scientific answer to things has always been hard for me. But when I got into real estate, there was so much nuance to it that I just loved it. I was like, finally something that it's a lot of answers are black and white, and you got to know this equals that, 2 + 2 = 4. Then a lot of answers are really nuanced, and you got to know, and you got to get the right people involved, the right players on the team to successfully execute on whatever it is you're trying to do in our business. So that was the thing that got me super pumped, and that answer is going to be different for everyone, right? But you just have to get out there and muck around in the mud a little bit to find out what's that thing you really get fired up about. So that's what's helped me. I think it's going to be different for everyone, but I don't know. I think that's what I advise anyone to do. And we're hiring an analyst right now on our team, and that's what I've been telling all these people I've been talking to. It's like, hey, just whatever you do, just get in the business. Getting into real estate, that first job is hard, but just get in and figure it out and try a bunch of stuff, and you'll eventually find out. You'll see, you'll stumble upon what you like.
So let's flip the script then a little bit, right? You're moving up the management tree in your world.
Great.
You're hiring an analyst,
okay.
Right? So now put your employer hat on, or your manager role hat on. What advice do you have, or what have you been thinking about as you've been going through this analyst role hiring process in terms of making sure that you communicate everything that we've spoken about so far to that next person that you're hiring, right? Like, we've already talked about how there's no loyalty in the workplace anymore. And it's not that there's not any loyalty, right? We're just over exaggerating a little bit. There's just not as much loyalty as there used to be. But in terms of hiring someone new, making sure that they find something within your company that they're good at, that they can feel good about, and trying to keep them on for the long haul, because we all know it is much more expensive to rehire than to retain good talent. So in terms of cultivating an employee, what are the things that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a different. So the guy I work for is a gentleman named Stephen Brink. He's amazing at what he does. I love working for him, but he's around my parents' age, and he's a little bit more, uh, old school in this approach. So we kind of respectfully debate, battle, however you want to call it, about this occasionally. But what I try to communicate, and I can do this because I'm not this analyst direct manager. I'm also not their peer, but I can kind of be that like older friend in the office and kind of give them inside baseball. And what I try to do with this, and it's usually going to be a young person, and they're usually going to say in the interview, they're going to say all the right things. I'm passionate about real estate. I really want to be in commercial real estate finance, and I'm really fascinated in this job in this company. And they're going to say all the right things, as they should, but they're really not going to know. They're not going to know unless they work for us for 6, 9, 12 months. And so what I say to them very frankly in the interview and on their first couple of weeks here is I take them to lunch. I did this with our last analyst. And I was like, you may get 6 months into this and you may be like, this sucks. I hate this. And the sooner you can let me know, and I can help you go and do something that you actually want to do, it's way better for both of us. And there's a selfish part of that's a selfish endeavor for me because I'm like, I don't want some person working for me, working on my best client Excelsior deals that, doesn't want to be here. Like I want someone who wants to be here. So it's a selfish endeavor for me, but it also communicates to that person like, oh, this person really like wants me to succeed and they want me to be here. And if I want to be here, and I tell people too, I go, if you don't want to do commercial real estate finance, but you're really interested in say, let's say they're really interested in development and they really want to be, work for, they want to be a multifamily developer when they grow up. I'll say, great, work for us for 2 years. We'll introduce you to all our clients that do multifamily development. And when it's time for you to move on, I'll call all of them and give you a personal recommendation and help you get a job in multifamily development. That's not what our parents' generation went through at all. It was like, you working for me, you got to be loyal. If you go to the rival company, it's, they're kicking you out the door by lunch. I don't care because for a lot of reasons that we don't need to get into, but that's kind of what I would encourage. That's how we look at people. And I think that's becoming more of a thing with guys our age, like you and me, Jared, that are hiring people. We're a lot more open to have conversations with that, like folks. But even if you're working for an employer that's not like that, or you think I want to go out on my own and do my own thing, or I don't know how they're going to feel about this. What I've noticed is everyone in it's really hard to rehire, and everyone in leadership really, at the end of the day, really, if they're even a halfway decent leader, they really respect the blunt honesty and the upfrontness with people that work for them of this is what I want to do. One, can you help me do it? But two, I just want to let you know. I think that's the best thing about all this, about all the job hopping and finding your passion stuff, is this like most employers, most managers are really now friendly to that. Whereas really, I think 20 years ago, most companies, they were not. There's exceptions to that, but I think, and I would kind of end it. I'd wrap it all up with saying, like, if that's not where, and I know the job market's hard today, but if you don't get any sort of vibes from your company or your manager, that's the culture of the firm, I'd encourage you to try to manage up and make it the culture. And if you can't, then it might be time for you to find a new job. Go apply for the analyst opening at BW. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on
I mean, my closing thought would just be, the balance is difficult, right? We live in such an instant gratification world where, this is an extreme example. I had a colleague a couple weeks ago, his daughter started a new job, her first job out of college, and first day, first week, hated it, was ready to quit. Right? Like came home every single night. I'm done.
First week,
I'm done. This is not working.
Yeah.
And 6 months in, she loves it. Now that's an extreme example, right? But there is.
But why did she start to love it, Jared?
Yes,
Did you get
and
into
that's
that
kind
with
of
your
the
colleague?
direction I'm going. Is I think over time she realized that there's this level of open communication and feeling supported, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
if your employees can feel that support, and that can be in terms of their day-to-day job, it can be in terms of if you want to go do something else, we will do what we can to support you. If they feel that level of support from management,
Mm-hmm.
then it's better for everyone involved. And I think that was, to kind of tie it all in, I think that was probably lacking in our parents' generation a little bit. And what you're starting to see come about
Totally.
more now is just, you know, we had an employee at Excelsior a couple weeks ago say that he was going off to start his own thing. We've since had another employee at Excelsior saying they're going to go start their own thing. We love that. Like, that means that you feel comfortable
Yeah.
enough
Yeah.
about your experience with us that you can go take what you've learned and apply it to what you want to do. Like, that is the best scenario for us.
Yep.
It hurts. Does it suck? Yeah, we love working with them. Like, we love them as people. We love them as employees. Like, we love spending time with them. But that's exactly what we want. Like, go out and find what it is
Yeah.
that you want to do and apply. Whatever it is that we taught you. Hopefully, it was a lot, and just do your thing.
Yep. I mean, that's the bittersweet nature of this business. Is real estate is not, there's no patents on real estate work. Like it's kind of, it's a commodity. It's really easy to go repeat, take a business model and go improve it and do it your own way or whatever. But like that's the greatest compliment for, I mean, I know it hurts and it sucks and you're like, man, I got to go find somebody else. But to you and Abhishek and William and Brian, it's like, hey, like, thanks for all the training. Really loved it here. I'm gonna go try to do this somewhere else. I'm gonna go do this for myself and like hopefully make a little more money. It's like, oh, awesome. Like I guess we're doing something right. And then it's like, oh crap. Like now we gotta go find somebody else. But yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great point. I think that's a great point. And that's kudos to you guys for, having a good perspective on it. Although I know it probably sucked
No,
in the moment.
you know, we'll find a way, and companies always do, employees always do, and that's the whole thing about it.
Absolutely.
Is as much as things hurt in the moment, I am a firm believer of things happen for a reason. So that's kind of hard to fall back on that. People don't love it because it's not concrete, but I think that ties it all in together perfectly. I did promise Abhishek that I would get your thoughts on the CRE lending market.
Oh boy.
So I think we're going to have to do a follow up episode where we talk about commercial real estate debt, which is going to be so much more exciting than this one.
That's dude, that's so boring that you'll have like no listens to that. But if
Yeah,
you want to, I'm
we'll get
down.
that one recorded.
Or we can do like an addendum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is I'm now
Yeah.
recording a month out, and as you well know, a month makes a big difference in this environment. And so I think,
I'll go ahead and say you can tell this to Abhishek. If there's a month delay, I will refuse to be a guest on the CRE debt markets because it'll get released and then I'll look like an idiot.
man,
Like,
you were so
Brandon thought
wrong. Yeah.
this a month ago, and it's like you were so
Yeah.
wrong.
I
Yeah,
think
I'm
about
not doing
that.
that. But happy to
I was going to say,
Go
I
ahead.
think about that sometimes when I'm listening to Brian Adams' podcast, the Capital Club podcast, because like me, he records so far in
Yeah,
advance,
yeah.
and he'll have these investment advisors on, and they'll say something about the market. I'm like, whoo, that was either really right or really, really not. So,
Fail.
um, you know,
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes. We'll make sure that we time it out to where we can release it right away, and I'll fulfill my promise to Bishek to talk to you about the CRE debt markets for the purposes of this podcast. We talked about.
I'll do it. Maybe we can do it as like a like advice to other sponsors on, hey, maybe not, where treasury rates going, but what's best practices for how to capitalize a deal.
Yeah,
I'd love
absolutely.
to do that. But if Abhishek puts me on the spot, I was a guest on one of y'all's podcasts years ago, and one of your former employees said, looked at me live when there were lots of guests, and he said, Graham, can you explain exactly how a CMBS bond is securitized in today's market? And I just was like, dude, why did you do this to me?
Put the interrogation light on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. But I appreciate you having me on, Jared. And
yeah,
this was a
man,
lot
we'll
of
do
fun.
round two. It'll be less fun, but we'll do it anyway. And so if you're interested in CRE debt markets, stay tuned for Graham's next podcast episode. And Graham, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared. This was fun. See you soon.